Hey everybody, JC here with another TNI toy review, and today we're going to take a look at the new DC Collectibles DC Comics Supervillains New 52 Bizarro figure. This figure came out last week and is available at your local comic book and specialty shops and favorite retailers. This figure, like all the DC Collectibles figures nowadays, comes in your standard window box packaging. You've got the DC Comics Supervillain logo up at the top. You've got the figure clearly displayed in the window box packaging, so you can see what you're getting. For this particular box, we have black and dark blue highlights to match the character, and then down below you have the name of the figure. On the one side you have a darkened in image of the Bizarro character, and then on the other side you have an actual image of the figure. It tells us the figure stands at 6.75 inches tall and that it's sculpted by Gentle Giant Studios. Then finally on the back you have a thumbnail image of the figure, a little brief bio written in Bizarro type speak, and then below that it shows us the Crime Syndicate figures that are 3 of which have already hit shelves, and the other 3 are due out this week, and we'll be taking a look at later on this week. Okay, so let's get this figure open and take a look at what's inside. Okay, so here's a look at the figure outside of the packaging. And like with all of DC Collectibles figures as of late, we're getting a really nice detailed looking figure with a good amount of articulation. DC Collectibles continues to pump out figures this year that seem to have high amounts of articulation, which is really nice. Now, one thing I will caution is, like with many of the recent DC Collectible figures, we are seeing that these figures are somewhat fragile and can break easily if you move the joints in the wrong way. And some of the joints do tend to be very tight once you get them out of the packaging. I didn't have too many problems with my figure. My ab crunch joint was a bit tight, but was able to get it to start moving without too much problem. I did have one of my legs come off out of the packaging. It's just attached to a ball joint. The joint didn't break or anything. You know, I'm able to snap it back on, but it is very loose, and I'll go over that when we look at the articulation on this figure. But I just want to caution that these figures, with the added articulation, also are a bit fragile, and so you want to just be careful when you're moving the figures around and posing them and stuff. But anyway, back to this figure. I really love the detail with the head sculpt on this figure. I think they've done a great job sculpting the deformed skin and everything. Those of you who have been reading the Forever Evil storyline know that basically Lex Luthor had to basically was cloning Superman, or trying to make a clone of Superman, but he had to rush the process and get Bizarro out early to basically combat the crime syndicate. So he's kind of like a Frankenstein's monster in this latest incarnation in the New 52 version. So I think again, DC Collectibles has done an amazing job with the sculpt on this figure, and just capturing that deformed look in the head sculpt and everything, which is really nice. Now, the figure, basically, it looks like, and if I remember correctly, did essentially put on Superman's shirt inside out. So that's why the shirt is kind of like a more flatter, lighter blue color, whereas like the pants are more metallic, like you see on the New 52 Superman figure. You know, this is basically Superman's pants, and then with a inside-out shirt, which is why the Superman logo is backwards. So again, nice detail. The belt on this figure is a separate piece. Again, I didn't have any problems with mine, but I have heard reports of people where their belt has broken, so you want to kind of be careful. But again, this is a separate piece, and it's not removable, but it is loose on the figure. The cape on this figure uses a metallic red paint. You know, just like with the pants, which are metallic blue, we see metallic red on the cape. Now, one thing I want to note, and the cape is just made with a soft vinyl type material, so it's very flexible. and you can see they've like kind of made it tattered on the end since it's Bizarro's cape. But one thing I want to point out on my figure, it looks like on the underside paint stuck from the cape to the figure's back. So that's just something you want to be careful of when you first take the figure out of the packaging. You don't want to chip the paint on the cape. Okay, scale wise, even though on the packaging it says this figure stands 6.75 inches tall, in fact he really stands much closer to 7 inches tall. So he is on the tall side, which is good. He is a bigger character. Here he is next to the new 52 Superman figure, and you can see they're about the same height, which is good since Bizarro is a clone of Superman. They should be about the same height. Bizarro is maybe a little bit taller because his hair sticks up. But again, for the most part, they are the same size. Now, one thing I want to point out, this is one of the original New 52 Supermans, and so you'll notice that the blue paint is not metallic like on the bottom half of Bizarro. Now, if I remember correctly, DC Collectibles did later release in a box set a New 52 version of Superman that does incorporate this more metallic blue paint on the costume. Articulation, just like with many of the figures we've been getting recently, this figure has a good amount of articulation, which is really nice. Now again, I just want to caution that when you first start posing the figure around, especially if you have tight joints, you want to be careful because sometimes the joints can break off easily. So just be cautious when you're starting to move it around. If you have a joint that's really stuck, then you probably want to try something like using a blow dryer or sticking it in warm water or something along those lines. I didn't have really any problems with mine. My ab crunch joint was a little tight when I first took him out of the package, but I was able to get it to move without using anything like heat or anything like that. So for the figure, basically the head is attached to a ball joint, so he's got left and right, and he's got pretty good up and down movement. You can try and halves it on the ball joint if you want to try and get him to look straight out when he's flying, but because there's no hinge on the neck, it doesn't quite go all the way up, but still he's got pretty good movement. Arms are attached to standard ball hinge joints at the shoulder. He's got the bicep swivel, single hinged elbows, and then he does have hinged swivel wrists. So he's got some up and down movement there at the wrist, which is nice. Both fists on this figure are basically sculpted in closed fisted positions for punching, so he can't hold anything. He does have an ab crunch joint, which, as I mentioned, on mine started out as being a bit tight. Still a little tight, but you know, I've been able to get it to move. And he does bend. He does, you know, look down, bends at the ab crunch pretty nicely, and back. So he's definitely got good posability. Now he doesn't, or actually he does have a swivel at the waist, and as I mentioned, that belt piece is a separate piece, so it doesn't really restrict the movement of the figure at all. Just be careful, you know, because I have heard some people say that the belt has broke on their figure. Legs are attached at ball joints. Now one thing I want to point out on my figure, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, when I actually took him out of the packaging, this left leg was detached from the figure. I was able to snap it back on with no problem. It is a bit loose. You can see it kind of definitely is a little bit loose at that joint. So that's just something you want to be wary of. Now he has a thigh swivel. He has double jointed knees, so he's got good bending at the knees. And then he does have an ankle pivot. And he has one peg hole on the bottom of his feet. My review. Overall, I think this is a pretty nice figure that DC Collectibles has given us. A lot of nice detail with the sculpting and on the skin, giving us that deformed look. I like the articulation. Again, you do want to use caution when you're posing these figures around because they can have very tight joints when you first bring it out of the packaging. And if you push too hard or pull too hard, you can sometimes snap those joints. So definitely use caution when you're, especially when you first start trying to pose the figure around. But articulation is really nice. You're able to get some really good poses on this figure. You know, I just wish we got a new 52 Superman figure with this kind of articulation, and I hope at some point we do. This figure is hitting shelves now, as I mentioned before, so be sure to check your local comic book shop or specialty store, or you can go online like places like Big Bad Toy Store and find this figure. And so that's my review. I hope you enjoy it, and until next time, I'll catch you later.